Hello and welcome to another of our Xbox One videos, and today we're looking at the new Xbox controller. Now, Microsoft has a lot to lose here because arguably it is replacing one of the most fondly loved controllers of all time. Now, I have no interest in starting a flame war here, but suffice it to say that I think this is the best controller. Now, I realise that opinion isn't for everyone. A lot of people will love the PS3 controller, and also certainly the PS4 controller when that arrives, which is an evolution of this, as this is of the Xbox controller. There is a lot of clever stuff that's gone into this though, and actually the improvements are significant and worth mentioning, particularly when you consider even the back has a bunch of these improvements that are very, very cool. The battery compartment is now recessed. If you look here, it wasn't previously, so you've got this big bulge. Apparently, ergonomically, that's a bad thing, and this gives you much more sort of clean sweep with your fingers. If you've got bigger hands, then you can sort of opt to have them in different places, and that should feel more natural. Personally, I never really felt that the battery compartment on that controller was a big deal. Microsoft also points out that it's removed the screw holes. Now, that might not seem like much of a big deal, but apparently it says that if you're playing for 8 or 9 hours, you can feel these screw holes quite badly, and that's a bad thing as well. So they're gone now. Now, obviously, I have one of these, which means that I am unable to play a game for 8 or 9 hours. Those of you who are married will understand what I mean. Now, what else about this controller? You can use either AA batteries in the back here. I'm using rechargeables here, and you can do that. The controller won't recharge rechargeable batteries, but it will recharge the Microsoft game pack. So you can't just put AA rechargeables in here and expect them to charge, but the game pack will, of course. It's good that it takes both, because actually that's really good, and it feels great. And actually there's been a massive drop in weight between these two, actually. This feels much lighter, and that's a really good thing, because obviously if you're playing for those kind of times, 8 or 9 hours, then the weight is going to be a bit of an issue. Another thing worthy of mentioning with this controller, also sort of at the back, the rear triggers. Now, these have been improved. I think they feel a lot smoother than the old ones, although that could just be because that controller's like 5 years old. But even so, they feel really good. There are vibration motors in here, much smaller than the ones at the front, but they give an element of motion here. The idea being that they can change depending on what gun you're using. If you're using a sniper rifle, it would be more subtle than a bazooka, was the example given by Microsoft. They're also talking about racing games where maybe you'll have one tyre on the curb this side, and you'll feel that very subtly over here, which is kind of good because it will give you feedback that you'll be able to, without even really realising, you'll be able to correct for those sort of problems. And that's great, and obviously it's a massive improvement to have that there. Microsoft's also very pleased with the power button. In fact, they were refusing to call it just a humble button. It's so much more. Apparently there's a light in here, obviously. You can see that when you press it, it does light up. There's a light tunnel, and then the light shines through here. Now, obviously this is an aluminium cover, or at least it's an aluminium colour. What that enables you to do is that you get a very sort of subtle glow around it. Now, in the video, they describe it as transparent aluminium, or aluminum in their words. It isn't, it's plastic, I'm pretty sure of that. They haven't just invented a Star Trek material. But it is quite cool, and there's also some stuff tied in here to infrared that enables Kinect to monitor where the controller is. Now that means if you're playing with a friend, you pass the controller, the console's able to detect that, and it knows who has the controller. That's pretty clever, actually, and we're rather impressed by that. And that's kind of like, feels a bit like the new Sony PlayStation controller, actually, how that's got a light that could be tied into that. I don't know what Microsoft's got planned for that, but it could be potentially quite important. They've obviously gone to a lot of effort to improve the D-pad. Now, the D-pad on the original controller is one of the more hated parts of it. It's pretty much universally accepted that that's the weakest part of the controller. It's not used a great deal for me, personally. I mean, it's generally used for menu selecting and stuff like that, but so it's never really been a big deal, but it definitely could be better, and they've improved that a great deal. The new controller does not have a ring around it, as you can see here, and it's not really protruding in the way this one is. It's also, from a design perspective, much nicer because it's just a clear, crisp plus, whereas this one is kind of mounted onto a circle. There's nothing wrong with that, but aesthetically it's much nicer here. It's mounted directly onto the motherboard apparently, which gives it means it doesn't need quite so much space. and makes it more flush with the controller. They've made similar changes to the X, Y, A and B buttons. Over here you can see that they're more buttony buttons. They're a different distance apart from each other on the new controller, but they have spent a lot of time getting that right. So they haven't just jumped to a new design. People aren't going to find themselves lost. But if you look at the way these buttons are on this new controller, they're actually pretty amazing, because they're sort of, the letters appear suspended in sort of air, if you will, if you buy into the Microsoft hype on the matter. It is really an incredibly nice controller. There's 40 changes that have been made between the two, and most of them are not aesthetic. Most of them are, you know, hardware and how the controller works. They've increased the wireless bandwidth by 20 times, which means you should get 20% less latency. That would be important to pro gamers, but of course, as we mentioned, you can plug this in with a cable. When you do that, you disable the wireless and it becomes a wired controller. And Microsoft's justification for that was, well, why make people buy two controllers for when they're at a tournament or whatever? Just give them the same controller, but give them that wired functionality. So it's a really smart idea, and it's more than just allowing you to charge the controller. It actually turns it into a proper wired controller. Really good. So what are my initial thoughts? Well, it's pretty difficult to make any sort of solid judgment without actually playing the console. Certainly aesthetically and feel wise, it's a pretty good controller. It certainly, for everything they've done, seems to be a solid improvement. I can't feel anything obvious that's wrong about this. It just does feel like they've put a lot of effort into it, and you know, they've evolved what they already had, and that's good, because if they didn't, then there would be outrage, and there's already more than enough outrage over the Xbox One. Also, the PlayStation controller, and obviously I haven't got the new PlayStation 4 controller. These two have been fighting it out for a long time. As I said, I don't particularly get on with the PlayStation 3 controller. I don't know how different the PlayStation 4 controller is. I do find this too small. It's also a lot lighter, which is nice, so if you're playing for a long time, that's an important thing to consider. But really, there's not going to be much competition, because most people who want to play both consoles will just buy both. They're both very good. I'm really looking forward to seeing the new PlayStation 4 controller, but particularly I don't have any worries with the Xbox One. We'll see you for more Xbox One videos and more videos in general here on Pocket-lint. Goodbye.